I rise to support the motion moved by the Premier. It is vital we honour the lives lost, recognise the hours, days, months and years of commitment of volunteers, career and those around the nation who supported the communities before, on and after the day we now recall as Black Saturday. The 2009 bushfires were much more than a day in time. It was the weeks and months. It was a decade of drought. It was a community warning, community meetings. It was the rebuilding that was to be taken. And sometimes we hear of people talk about things being rebuilt. And yes, a hall, a classroom, a shop can be rebuilt. But the community, the student and the local shopkeepers will continue rebuilding for many decades to come. The raw stats alone are enough to make anyone understand the gravity of the day. The destructions of thousands of homes, ferocious way towns were destroyed, the lives lost and the land burnt. These are figures that will be forever remembered. After the stats are community things that cannot be measured, with the unbelievable statistics, communities bound together to support each other. 78 communities across the state were directly affected. Every community across the country felt something on that day and for the months after. 19,000 CFA members were involved in frontline firefighting, incident management and support behind the scenes. In addition, there were thousands of emergency service workers who did everything to support Victoria, the communities impacted and those on the front line. I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to each and every person who went above and beyond for the community. To all our paid emergency services workers, your work is appreciated. I know in the past I have stated something in this House that I'll have to live with, not just for my Parliament life, but my entire life. However, I want to ensure each and every person in our paid services, we thank you, we honour you and we respect you. To our volunteers, Victoria needs you. We respect each and everything you do for our community and the way you do it, not for thanks, but because it's right. We thank you for the time away from home and the risk you take to protect the community you serve. I was not an MP on the day of the fires, and I know many in the community hate us talking about ourselves, but this is different. Each and every MP, and particularly those with communities directly impacted, you deserve our thanks. Tammy Lobato was the MP in Gembrook at the time, and her compassion for her community was shown that day. To all the MPs in here who were active at the time and seeing things you never wanted to see, or hearing stories that will be with you forever, thank you. On 7 February 2009, I was home watching on 7 February 2009, I was at home. We watched a video the other day with my daughters of us on the decking in our Berwick home. The smoke haze, the heat, the wind. It was frightening, but we were safe, and our thoughts were with those that were under threat. Again on that day, to show the scale, 2 of my staff from my bakery were arriving in Australia for the first time to live here from Vietnam. Their first visit to Victoria ever. And as the plane came over, Zung spoke to me of the fear they had of arriving in what looked like hell, a state alight. Locally, men and women from Casey and Cardinia went to the front line, and I would like to put a few of their bits on the record and a few of their stories from the local papers this week, as our local papers recall what happened during that disastrous period of time in Victoria. A firefighter throwing a comforting arm around a farmer at Longwarry has emerged as an iconic frozen moment of the events of Black Saturday. Images of that day, 7 February 2009, are etched into the memories of many people. For the many who endured the horrors and the many who turned out to help, those moments will be stored away forever. This week, coming off a run of hot days and with a pale of smoke in the air from the nearby fires, those memories eerily came to the surface for the 10th anniversary of Black Saturday. The firefighter on the Longwarry Road was First Lieutenant Joe Atkin. The farmer had approached him, visibly shaken, and with a handkerchief covering his mouth, asking for advice. Lieutenant Atkin reassured him that the CFA was there to help and he had the situation under control. Hours later, the fire had claimed a dozen homes in the vicinity, but his wasn't one of them. Another photo that came out from a local journalist down our area was a photo of Captain Brad Waterhouse of the Maryknoll Fire Service. This photo was of Brad exhausted after fighting fires, going out and protecting his community. And many may remember the photo. He was sitting at what looked like by himself with an oxygen tank, his head in his hands, and it became an image not just here in Victoria, but his parents' surprise at the time. That image went around the world. And Brad was embarrassed by this photo at first because it showed him by himself and it didn't show the team that was around him as he sat on that ground with 4 or 5 other firefighters in the local vicinity. Now, later on, his own friends convinced him that, Brad, this is actually a photo in time that you should be proud of. It is one that shows what all of our volunteers, all of our firefighters had to go through and the pain and struggle they went through. Unfortunately, Brad didn't make it to the 10th anniversary. He recently passed away from cancer, but I know that the support from his community to his family is still there today in everything they did. Many other stories come out from Black Saturday, with this one, the cool head in a fire disaster. And this is about Trevor Owen. And Trevor Owen was the CFA's Incident Control Centre at Dandenong, and Mr Owen oversees the southeast. And it reads, Mr Owen was one of the few fire and emergency commanders singled out for his cool-headed decisiveness by a Royal Commission into the 2009 disaster. He made the tough call to divert fire trucks in a fast-moving grass fire amongst home in Narrewarren South to avert a potential catastrophe in Harkaway. If unchecked, the galloping Harkaway blaze, buffeted by a fierce southwesterly wind, could envelope the Dandenongs in an Ash Wednesday-like horror scenario. It was the right call. It was a matter of life and death. But it was a difficult one. During the hellish afternoon, he got a call from his wife working in a supermarket in Narrewarren South, not far from his home. And she said, "Have you got some fire trucks coming?" she asked. He said, "We don't have any." And we want to thank Trevor and his team, but they're the words you only want to hear in movies. When you have a disaster that is that big, that you have to reply to your wife on the phone who's asking for help, "I'm sorry, we actually can't come and help," and that's your own family at the time. You couldn't imagine exactly how it went through with Trevor's mind. Gary Howe was our editor and still is our editor of the Star News Group. He's been a volunteer firefighter, he's very active in his community, and he wrote about Black Saturday of recalling staff. He spoke about getting the images that the media had to see, and these are the people that sometimes are forgotten, the things that they see, the stories they've done, and the things that they have to live with from what's happened during these fires. And he said a few of the images have stuck in his mind. Gazette reporter Jade Lawton, who halted from Hillsville, raced back on Sunday to check on her horses and snapped an image of a dazed and devastated neighbour, which wound up on the front page of that week's paper as the local image of what was happening with the fires down there. The images of the other side of human nature stick with them most, like the photo of 4 firefighters who took time out to visit a florist and buy flowers for their partners on Valentine's Day. To buy flowers, imagine if you're having to think of that, you're going through that absolute horrible time and you want to try and bring something good into your life, and these 4 firefighters pull in, buy flowers from them on the way home. But the most poignant was snapped by CFA's own Keith Pakenham, someone who nailed a piece of corrugated iron to a tree that crudely painted in the words, "Thanks, CFA." And that photo has stuck with Gary ever since. And that photo was in the paper this week of just reminding people that they needed to thank the CFA. We all know that volunteers gave their all. We all know that volunteers in our community, not just in the fire services, but in other emergency services, in local community groups, and they gave everything. And they knew that the day was going to be unbelievable. Everybody knew what it was going to be like when you woke up that morning. The warnings were out there. And all of our emergency services workers, they have supported each other continuously, and we want to thank them for that. Russell Bennett is a local journalist in our area. He's been involved again with the local community. He wrote his story, which actually I found quite interesting reading through. His family history within the fire services and the volunteers up through Gembrook dates back a long time, with his father being awarded a 50-year service medal in 2014. He said, "I was never cut out to be a firefighter. Anyone who knows me would agree. I could never be characterised as someone who was mechanically minded. So I can only imagine what my brigade mates would have thought when I joined the CFA as a teenager more than 15 years ago. When I first signed up, I felt so out of place. I didn't feel brave or even particularly self-assured around a group of firefighters who I was honestly in awe of. Even going through my training, I felt at least a step behind in the practical tests. Nothing came naturally to me. But the encouragement I received from the brigade's other members was endless. It wasn't long before I was turning out an instance, and while my heart would always skip a beat when the pager went off, often in the dead of night, I know I was part of a team full of people who'd be there to pick me up if I fell. We were builders, plumbers, retail workers, farmers, graphic designers, school teachers, mechanics, tree loppers, small business owners, students, and yes, even writers. And I think that's a message to so many in our community. You may not think that you are a volunteer firefighter, but if you want to go out there and have a go and protect your community, the CFA, the men and women in the CFA will be more than willing to support you. We're also, as I've said before, we are rebuilding, and it's important that we do rebuild. And I read a caption from Kingslake, still recovering from Victoria bushfires 10 years on, because it strung a chord with me. While some fear a generation of traumatised young people with behavioural problems, Kinglake mother Leslie Bebbington is proud of the children's recovery. Miss Bebbington, who helped form Ilimita Youth Inc. as an intervention group for youths whose friends died, says the area's young have done remarkably well. I am just proud children, survived, that they got through it. I always believed they would be okay, Miss Bebbington said. You see them now. We've got plumbers, vets, nurses, artists, horticulturalists, all doing well. And that's the sign of the rebuilding that we're talking about through our communities. There's other programs that have been running throughout Victoria with Wildhaven and Freedom Care, and there's many other groups out there who have been helping out in their local communities, and again, I wanted to thank them. I want to send my thanks to every person who did anything for the 78 communities. We know these events can happen again. We know that we must be prepared, but most important, we know that our communities will always stand together and support each other because we are all proud Victorians.